In this lesson, we'll cover saving your structural project specifically for work sharing. What is work sharing? Work sharing is basically setting up a Revit project to act as a central server or central file, and then multiple users will have a copy of that, but they synchronize changes back to that central file, which then syncs out to everyone else, so everyone is currently and constantly updated with what each one is doing, adding or removing to that BIM or Revit model. So now that we know what that is, how do we set this up? Well, generally you should set this up, work sharing that is, when you first start a project. So you can create a new project from a template, and then the next step before you start to design would be to create the central file on the server or on a designated location on your network. So what we have here in this lesson so far is basically just a new project created from a template. What I need to do next is start to define elements for this central file in order to set up work sharing. All of this is set up and controlled from the Collaborate tab. Let's click the Collaborate tab within Revit. Now the first thing I need to do is to define work sets. In the left panel called Manage Collaboration, click Work Sets. The first thing that Revit's going to tell you is it's going to create a new series of work sets, in this case for shared levels in grids. So we're going to accept that one by default, and then we're going to add additional work sets. So go ahead and click OK. Now when you click OK, Revit starts to apply these work sets to this current project. Then a screen will pop up asking you to create additional work sets if you want. So let's add a few work sets and then we'll define what we're looking at. So I may create another work set based on discipline, such as structure. So this work set here I can call structure. Maybe I want another work set for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. So I can call it MEP. Or you could break it apart and have one for mechanical, one for electrical, one for plumbing. Or maybe I want to delineate down and have one called walls, or doors, or windows, or beams, or footings, or floors. You can make this as minute or micro as you want, or keep it at a higher level. So you may say, okay, well, what are work sets and how do they work? When multiple users are working with the Revit file, or their copy of it, they're going to add things. And whatever work set is current, even though you're adding something to the model or modifying something, it's being recorded to that current work set. So let's say I was working on the structural element of the building. Well, I'm going to make my work set for structure current. So anything I do right at that moment or that point forward is linked or tied to the structure work set. Now, what I can do with these columns where we see editable, owner, borrowers, etc., this is where I can start to control or lock people from building or adding anything within that work set. So what editable means right now when it says yes, it doesn't mean you really can, edit everything. It means that if I mark this work set as editable and I'm the owner. Now, by default for this lesson, I'm owner number 1. So what I actually see here is I'm the owner and my owner name is number 1. It's basically how I'm logged into Windows. You'll see your username. The owner basically is someone that takes ownership of that actual work set. Now, if you take ownership by making it active and you mark that work set as yes, editable, that means you can only edit it or add to it or modify it, meaning anything done within that work set, and no one else can. So there's a plus and a minus to that, because it could lock everyone else out from modifying something. So you may say, well, when would you use that and when wouldn't you? Well, let's say your building is under design review. So you don't want anyone else to actually make modifications or add elements to that work set. So that's where you would actually take ownership, mark it as editable, which locks everyone else out from actually modifying anything on the work set. Now, the other columns listed, borrowers or people that would borrow that work set. Open mean yes, it's open and visible in all views. And you can come back to this just by clicking work sets and add more work sets. Let's go ahead and click OK. Now that we set our work set up, you can actually see the work sets in the drop down on the very top on the left side of the ribbon for what we just created. You also have a drop down that's on the very bottom of your Revit window for setting your work set. It's here on the bottom so you don't have to continually go back to the Collaboration tab on the ribbon. So now with the work sets set, the next step is really to save this as a central file. To do that, I'm going to go to the large R, save as, project. Now what you're going to want to do is give this project a name. Now you may have a project number, you may have a project physical name and number, but what I'm going to do for this example is I'm just going to name this central project. And that's going to be known as the central project that all of the users will synchronize to. So the name can be descriptive as you want, but in this example here, I'm just using the name central project. Go ahead and click Save. Now what Revit does, it's saving this, it understands that there's work sets, and it's creating a central project file. Now the next step you want to do, since I created the work sets and I still own the work sets, I want to relinquish anything that's mine, meaning I want to give up ownership. Because I don't need ownership, I just created it, so we're going to put this in production. So click Relinquish All Mine, that gives ownership back to basically no one. The last step is to synchronize with the central file. Now you could do Synchronize and Modify Settings or Synchronize Now. Synchronize Now basically is just a quick synchronization, pushing any changes up and pulling changes down. If you did Synchronize and Modify Settings, you have the ability to actually synchronize partial elements and also add comments for history of what you're synchronizing. I'm going to click Cancel since I already synchronized. Now, if you go back and click on Work Sets, you'll actually notice that I'm no longer the owner of the work set, and all of the work sets for editable are marked as no, which means anyone can open up or make active any one of these work sets and add things to it or modify things from it. And the way that process would work is simply by making a work set current by selecting it. That work set is current now, such as structure, so anything I add from this point forward is tied to that work set. But because it's not editable, it means that anyone can add to that work set. Unless someone takes ownership and makes it editable, then only that person can modify or add elements to that work set. So what we looked at in this lesson was saving your structural project, specifically for work sharing. We discussed what work sharing is, basically setting up a central file for a Revit project that all users would have a copy of, and they synchronize their copies changes back to that central file, which then synchronizes out to everyone else. So everyone is constantly kept up to date with what each person is adding to this central Revit project. The first step is to create a template. And then once the template is set up, we define work sets. Work sets are just ways of breaking down who or what is going to be working on different parts of your Revit project. We could set it up by discipline, such as structure, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, or by task, walls, doors, windows, for example. And then after the work sets are set up, the last step is to save this project as the central file. We do that by just going to the large R, File, Save, Save As, and giving it a name. The name we chose was just Central Project. And then after we did that, we relinquished all ownership for any of the work sets that we created, basically setting them all to no, not editable, meaning anyone can add anything to any of the work sets from that point forward.